Hello, and welcome to Religious Rebels, a podcast where we push back on behavior-based religion, question Christianity's concepts, and seek to find Jesus in the awkward middle way of grace and truth. I'm Christy Lynn Wood. Welcome back to Religious Rebels. I'm glad to have you here with me today. So today we're going to talk about Christian nationalism, all things Christian nationalism, kind of where it might have come from, the multiple places that it may have come from, what is behind it, why it's so popular right now, and just that kind of a thought. Now, some of you may be tuning in for the first time because you're just interested in this whole Christian nationalism thing, and you're wondering, who am I and why am I talking about it? So just a quick introduction here. I spent 10 years from the age of 12 until the age of 22 in Bill Gothard's IBLP homeschooling program called the Advanced Training Institute. And if you watched Amazon Prime's Shiny Happy People documentary, then you'll be familiar with the things that I went through as a teenager and as a young adult, and the things that I've had to kind of work out of my mind since then. So talking about Christian nationalism, coming from my perspective, is something that I'm very, very familiar with. And so I want to kind of start there. When I was a kid, there was a huge push to become involved in politics. And we had people from our culty Gothard church that were running in state politics, in citywide politics. And the whole goal was to kind of get these people in there, these good and godly people in there, to make this difference in our world. And I don't know what the adults were thinking, like what was the thought processes in their head. But as a young person who kind of caught the glimpse of what was going on, I felt like we were trying to help people to make good choices, force them, I guess, to follow the rules that we followed because we really felt that they were best for humanity. If you followed the rules we followed, you would have blessings and success. And so if we could convince the rest of the worldly world to follow our rules, then we would also guarantee you guys blessing and success. And then you would see that our way is the right way, the new way to approach life, or whatever Gothard would like to call it. Giving the world a new approach to life is what he said. And so then you would also be blessed because you were following the formulas and the rules. And then you would realize this was a good thing and you would be happy about it. That was my thought process as a young person looking at this and thinking, yes, this is a good idea. We should be getting into politics. We should be trying to take over the world. Mr. Duggar, Jim Bob, he went ahead and ran for office and won. And this is just something that it was one of those things. We were trying to influence culture. And I don't know that we were necessarily trying to follow any mandates. We're going to talk about the Seven Mountain Mandate later or anything like that. I don't know that we were really trying to, we were trying to take over the world. So I guess, we were trying to take over the world. Fundy people taking over the world. But there was this idea of this is the best moral way to live. And so we want you to also follow the moral way to live. Now, side note to that, there also was a very strong belief that America had started as a Christian nation, and that it was our job to return America to its Christian roots. And so that's also what we were trying to do. Stay separate from the world, and yet influence the world and kind of force the world to follow our narrow way. So great. And then, so I look at that from that perspective, and I still see people that have the same kind of idea right now when it comes to Christian nationalism. They want to create these moral rules that they believe, their definition of morality, the world should be following in order for the world to be good, in order for there to be this blessing, in order for there to be this goodness that happens because we are now following all of these laws that are from God. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. The idea of what Christian nationalism is. There's a lot of different ways you could look at it, but I think of it as this belief, a strongly held belief, that America needs to return to its Christian heritage, its Christian roots. People who truly believe that America was started as a place for Christians to find refuge, for Protestant Christians to find refuge, and that it was created to be this place of Christian flourishing. Now, that is one narrative, a specific narrative that they're following. I no longer believe in that narrative. I think that our country was founded with Judeo-Christian ideas, with some thought processes, with people who believed in a higher power, people who were deists, people who had respect for the Bible, who had respect for the Ten Commandments. But I don't think it was ever this like evangelical Christian paradise that people think it was, which kind of brings us to another thought. And that is that many times in my life in the cult, and I think along the lines of Doug Wilson in Moscow, Idaho. So if you have never actually looked at Doug Wilson, you should maybe do that. It is a little terrifying, specifically for me, because it feels like my cult is winning and they've currently taken over this town of Moscow. And Doug Wilson is an extreme patriarchal person. Like, he doesn't even believe women should have the power to vote. So the things that he says about women, about the family, about government, about the church are just all like super extreme and kind of just ring true of my cult days. And so he is pretty terrifying, but he wants to take over. He has this dominionist idea. We're going to take over this town. We're going to take over this state. We're going to take over and force you to follow our Christian principles and morals. So I think there is this idea that America needs to return to this Christian nation that it supposedly once was. And this is really based on kind of a fantasy view of the good old days. And people just have this kind of dreamy, idealistic view of the Victorian era. And I just recently finished Karen Swallow Prior's The Evangelical Imagination, which I think is a must read for anybody who's trying to figure out what the heck is going on with evangelicalism these days. She just really breaks it down without condemnation or snarkiness. Like, she just breaks it down and explains, like, this is what's happening and why. And yet here is the beauty in it and here is the hope. I love it. So, but the whole idea is that we have this fantasy view of these good old days, this fantasy view of the Victorian era, and what it meant to be a Christian often really just means what it means to be Victorian. And so we just have a really skewed view often of what it looks like. And so within the Christian nationalist movement, there is this push to get back to these good old days that I don't think ever really existed. What were these days really good for? White men, a few of them who were affluent. The good old days were full of poverty and sickness and early death and death in childbirth and slavery and women being like with no rights and no personhood. I mean, there's a lot of really bad things that happened in these supposed good old days. It was just kind of masked over. And as we remember it, we tend to remember it with rose-colored glasses and with a certain perspective. There's lots of horrible things that happened. And so I don't think we need to return to any kind of a good old days. So just cross that one off your list. Where is Christian nationalism coming from? I think it's really easy for people who have never experienced Christian nationalism firsthand to just declare people stupid. Like, these people are just stupid. They're not thinking things through, whatever. Most people, you guys, I want you to hear me. Most people do not choose to believe things just purely out of ignorance or stupidity. Most people believe things for what they feel to be a good reason. They have a good reason behind their beliefs. And this is something we are missing right now in our culture, because we're so quick to just decide those other people over there are just ignorant, they're stupid, they're not thinking things through, like they're morons. We just other them, and we shut them down and we shut them out. And instead of listening to what's behind their thoughts, what's behind their beliefs, I think if we would take a moment to just really hear people's hearts, we would recognize that most of us are operating from a very similar place. We just see the world differently. Our perspectives that are created by our experiences, by our world that we live in, by the people we've been raised by, like, those perspectives are very different, but our hearts are often very similar. The things that we're looking for, the things that motivate us, are often very similar. And so I really think that a lot of this Christian nationalism is motivated by fear. People are afraid. They're afraid of change. They're afraid of things they don't understand. They're afraid of the world becoming this like evil, horrible place. And it's really just this place of fear. If I can control, then I feel safer. And so I don't want to look at people who are buying into the Christian nationalist movement as being stupid or ignorant. I think that they are people who are afraid and who are grabbing onto something that makes them feel safer and more secure. And so I think that's why it's really important to just kind of like break it down of why it's not actually biblical and why it doesn't actually work. So let's look at this really quick. Moralism, this idea that if we get people to follow our rules, our Christian rules will make them happy, is one reason that people are really grabbing onto this Christian nationalist movement. That, along with the idea of we need to return America to her Christian roots. Now, there is another couple things that I think are coming into this that was not something that I dealt with in the cult days at all. Mine was like Christian roots and moralism. But there are a whole different set of people. And I even had someone online talking about this. Like, I would say these people are completely normal except for this. And there's a whole new set of people. So maybe not the super fundamental people who are super strict in their beliefs and their opinions. These people seem to be pretty normal, and yet they are also buying into this Christian nationalism movement. And you're like, what is going on? And I think it's coming down to this. It's the end times. So people have different views of the end times. And I don't think that any of them, I mean, people are very staunch in their view of the end times, but I don't think any of them have like a solid grasp on like, this is actually the truth. I can prove it. It's clear. The Bible is pretty vague on end time stuff. It's pretty like, is this literal? Is this metaphorical? Like, just it's kind of iffy. The only thing that's super clear in my mind is Jesus is coming back. That's the only thing I got. So I'm going to hold on to that. He's coming back. He's going to get us. He's going to reign as king and make all things new. That's what I'm holding on to. What happens in between now and then? But I think this is what's happening. So within the end times eschatology or the end times theology, we're looking at a few things. The first of four views is amillennialism. And within each of these views, you're going to have a belief about the millennial reign of Christ. You're going to have a belief about the return of Christ. And there's usually something about the tribulation, the Antichrist, and stuff like that within there as well. Amillennialists believe that it's all like metaphorical. So the reign of Christ here on earth is not really an actual reign. It's not actually for 1,000 years. That it's simply the reign of the Holy Spirit in our hearts that started when he came at Pentecost until Jesus comes back. And that's it. That's amillennialism. Then we've got postmillennialism. Now, this view used to be very popular before the World War I, World War II. So in the Victorian era, as they seemed to watch things get better and better and better, there was more and more just social things that were happening that were improving the life and health of people. And there's these revivals that were happening around the world, and people were getting better jobs and moving up in their affluence. And it seemed like the world was getting better and better and better. And so this postmillennial view of the return of Christ became very popular. And that was the world is going to get better and better and better and better and better. And then Jesus is going to come back and reign. And it makes sense. That view kind of went down the tubes after the 2 world wars because they no longer looked like the world was getting better and better and better. However, I want you to hold on to that because that's what's kind of going on right now. Okay, then we've got premillennialism. And all of us are familiar with premillennialism because of the end times books. Okay, so if you've grown up in the 90s and you're not living under a rock somewhere, you probably are familiar with the Left Behind series. And this was a very literal view of premillennialism, that there is going to be a literal point in time when the church is raptured. There's going to be a literal 7 years of tribulation. There's going to be a literal Antichrist. And there's going to be a literal return of Jesus and this 1,000 years where he literally reigns on earth. So very literal, like this is actually going to happen kind of stuff. And that the world's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. Then there's going to be this tribulation period. And then Jesus is going to come back and reign as king. And so after the world wars, they were like, yeah, this is a better plan of how this world's going to end. It just made more sense to them. So for years, especially with the evangelicals, we've had this premillennial view of the end times. However, recently, since 2013, when a book was published called Invading Babylon by Bill Johnson from Bethel Church in Redding, California, and Lance, I think it's Walrau, it's like Wallrau, Walrau probably. So they wrote Invading Babylon, and they kind of really pushed this 7-mountain mandate to the front of thinking for many Pentecostals and other charismatics who are following them. And there's this 7-mountain mandate supposedly, and it's pretty sketchy as far as like scriptural backing. But according to them, we have been mandated, it's kind of a dominionist theology, we have been mandated by God to take back these 7 spheres of culture. And so they want us to take back religion, family, government, education, media, arts and entertainment, and business. And that it is the job of Christians to get involved and take back these 7 spheres of culture. People actually believe that by doing this, they can force or cause Jesus to return to earth. So this is almost post-millennial again. Like if we make this stuff happen, if we take over these places, then Jesus will come back and reign. And this is what I heard from friends of mine online who were saying people who are normal to me start talking about like politics and Trump versus Biden and all this stuff. And they really think that they can force Jesus to come back by taking over these spheres, specifically the sphere of government in this case. And so I think this is what is really pushing Christian nationalism right now. Like, yes, you have the fundies like me, and you have these people who are trying to control the world, and they're super strict, and they're super patriarchal, and all this kind of stuff like that. But on the other side, you have people who are involved in the NAR, the New Apostolic Reformation, churches like Bethel and other charismatic big churches who are pushing this 7-mountain mandate. We need to take over these spheres of culture, one of which being government. And these two are kind of colliding. And that's what we see, is this push for Christian nationalism. And I would just like to say that I don't believe any of this is biblical. Like, none of it. It's all just stuff we've made up in our head that we're claiming Bible verses here and there and picking and choosing and claiming this is from God. And this is not how Jesus worked. If you look at Jesus and his life on earth, he specifically told his disciples, "My kingdom is not of this world." It's not of this world. He stopped them from picking up their swords and trying by force to stop him from being crucified. He was never into taking over anything. Every time a big crowd would gather, he would say something super weird and they would disperse. Like, he was not trying to find power and influence. If he was, he'd be hanging out in Jerusalem and being friends with the religious leaders. He was not here for any of that. He never asked his followers to take over anything. He never asked them to try to have dominion over anything. In fact, he was radically countercultural. He was constantly reaching out to women who were not appreciated or valued, to the outcasts of society, to the Samaritans, to the lepers, to the children, to all these people who were not valued and who were othered. And yet, here we are, these Christian nationalists, trying to create a Christian nation, a Christian kingdom. Like, this is so backwards compared to how Jesus did things. So I just want to close with just a few thoughts, guys, a few comments. Like, I want you to hear from somebody who grew up in a cult, who believed this stuff, and who now sees from a completely different perspective. People who are jumping into Christian nationalism are not doing it because they're stupid or ignorant. They're probably afraid, and this feels like a good idea. Or they've probably been deceived, and they really think it's biblical. So I think your best bet, rather than just pushing back at them and fighting at them, is to ask questions. To dig in and ask those questions. Why do you believe that? Where do you see that in Scripture? Can you explain to me how this matches up with the person that Jesus was? And really try to get to the heart of where they're coming from. If you're somebody who's starting to buy into this, then I would like you to hear this from me. Forcing people to follow our definition of morality will never make them closer to God. When you do that, you are being a Pharisee. You are being a religious leader. You are forcing that moral code on people when Jesus came to set them free. God doesn't want good people. We can't be good. There's nothing we can do to be good enough to make God happy with us. But he doesn't care because he loves us anyway. That's why Jesus came to die for us. Like, our sin problem is so deep that no amount of morality and following laws is going to fix it. We need Jesus. We need a heart transformation. We need to be changed from the inside out so that out of our good heart will now flow goodness. That's the fruit of the Spirit. That's what Galatians is all about. It's not about forcing people to follow our moral code on the outside. Following the rules and the formulas might feel really good because it gives us a sense of control, but it doesn't impress God. It doesn't. He just wants our heart. All people matter to God. All people were created in his image. Every single person is loved by God. And so when our good news separates people, when it pushes people away, when it says, this is good and you're bad, that isn't the good news. That is not the true gospel of the real Jesus. That is a false gospel of religion, and it's wrong. So, Christian nationalism, bad. Following Jesus, good. No earthly kingdoms, just following him, allowing him to transform our hearts, to make us into the person that we were created to be, so we can love this broken world around us and show them who Jesus has been to us. Thanks for listening, guys. Until next time, keep searching.